Greetings and good evening to all of our parents, all of our educators, community leaders, and activists. I am Justin Alexander, graduate intern for the Wilmington Center for Education, Equity, and Policy and Delaware State University Educational Leadership doctoral candidate. And my research area of focus is culturally responsive pedagogy. And I am very excited and proud to welcome you all to our monthly Monday series session titled Restorative Practice, the Adultification of Black and Brown Children. This session was designed to highlight the harm of adultification causes and, more importantly, how it can be addressed by building inclusive and welcoming school environments through restorative practices. This evening, we have an amazing panel of organization leaders, educators, and as well as community activists and leaders that will provide you with the skills, the knowledge, and the tools to not only support your students and support the students within your community, but also support your organizations and schools in support of all of our Black and Brown children and students. Built upon the foundation of advocacy, research, and community organization, the Wilmington Center for Education, Equity, and Policy, or CEEP for short, was created to ensure that all Black and Brown children living in the city of Wilmington would no longer be harmed by poor educational experiences. So everyone remain attentive inside of our chat on Facebook and YouTube. Provide your questions and your comments because the experts are here today to provide you with all that you need to know to be able to support our Black and Brown students. And at this time, I would like to introduce a passionate educator for parents and students with a dedication in having over 20 years of experience supporting schools, community-based and faith-based organizations, as well as one of the founding members of the Wilmington Center for Education, Equity, and Policy, and the current program director with the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League, managing the Achievement Matters, Ms. Shannon Griffin, who is our session moderator for this evening. So everyone, I introduce to you Shannon Griffin.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Justin. And hello, everyone, and welcome to the Wilmington Center for Education, Equity, and Policy monthly Monday series. Schools across the country suspend Black and Brown students at higher rates than their white peers. Unfortunately, this is true in Delaware as well. The perception of students of color plays a role in what's referred to as adultification. We will focus on the root causes of disparity in school discipline and restorative ways to address it. We will also hear from local training specialists and educators who are doing the work and seeing the results. But before we get started, we want to see who's in the room. So either in the chat or the comment section, if you could put a 1 if you are a parent or parental guardian, a 2 if you are an educator, and if you can also indicate the school or district that you represent, a 3 if you are a community member. Did everyone get that? So again, we just want to see who's in the room. Also, please remember to include your questions. We'll be able to refer to audience questions as we go through the session today, and we'll try to address as many as we possibly can. But let's get started, and let's take a look at school discipline in Delaware. Let's set the stage. Overall, out-of-school suspensions has been decreasing year to year. And you can see that from 2017 to 2018, the numbers of suspensions to where we are now, 2019, the last completed school year, 2019 to 2020. You'll notice a decrease, but also keep in mind that in the 2019-2020 school year, we had COVID. And so schools were moving virtually beginning in March of 2020. So that could be one of the reasons why you saw the suspension rates go down so significantly. But one thing to note is that Black students are on average are suspended 2 to 4 times more than their white students. Black girls are suspended 4 to 5 times more than white girls. And Latinx students are suspended 2 times more than their white peers. Next slide, please. So what are students being suspended for? I think the results may shock a few of you. So listed here are some top reasons why students are being suspended. Disruption of the educational process, disrespectful behaviors, abusive language, tardiness to class, lateness to school, dress code violations, unauthorized technology, which typically means students are using cell phones, fighting, school bus conduct, and inappropriate touching student to student. And what you might find here is that some of these categories are very broad, right? And so what may be considered disruption of the educational process in one educator's classroom may not be considered in another. And so there is a wide range, right, of disparity in how these disciplines are used and who they're used on. And you won't notice that of those top 10 that I mentioned, one we would actually consider, two we would consider to be more serious, like fighting and inappropriate touching. But the others are what we would consider low-level types of offenses. Next slide, please. So in 2018, Delaware, we passed a school discipline improvement bill known as SB 85, or the School Discipline Improvement Program. And that bill addresses this issue in two ways. One, it requires data transparency. So it requires the Delaware Department of Education submit a report that will include in-school suspensions and out-of-school suspensions, alternative school assignments, and expulsions at the school level. They also require to disaggregate the data by race, ethnicity, gender, grade level, limited English proficiency, the incident type, the discipline duration, which means how long students were suspended for out of class 4, and if the student is identified as having a disability. Next slide, please. The other thing the bill requires is action. So if schools have high rates of disparity overall, in those subgroups rather, or if they have high rates of suspensions overall, they have to enter in what's called a corrective action plan. And that plan should be put together with input from educators, parents, students, and community stakeholders. They need to highlight and really look at possible policies and practices that may have zero tolerance implications. And they should be looking for codes of conduct that actually promote greater fairness and equity in their discipline practices. They should consider restorative practices in their approaches. And then those plans need to be approved by the local school board. Of the 221 schools, public schools that we have statewide, including charter schools, 64 schools now require corrective action. And if you want to find out if your school is one of those schools, you can go to www.doe.k12.de.us. You can also search going to the climate page, and there you will see the full report, which lists each school that is required to provide corrective action and the type of group, cell group, that they were kicked in for. Next slide. So hopefully everyone has an understanding of kind of where we are in Delaware with regard to school discipline. But now we want to dig into a little bit of why we're here, right? What's behind those numbers? Because our students are more than statistics and they're more than numbers. So we want to find a little bit more about what's actually happening. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Malik Muhammad. Dr. Muhammad has over 25 years of experience serving both youth and adults as an educator, a transformational leader, an entrepreneur, and author, always working with underserved in urban and rural areas. He is focused on the development of boys to men, establishing a pedagogy for oppressed youth, and building progressive organizations. He is currently the founder and CEO of several educational, mental health, and human services operations, including Akoben, LLC, and Transforming Lives, Incorporated. He is the author of The Restorative Journey, Book 1, The Theory and Application of Restorative Practices, and a contributing author of the recently released Colorizing Restorative Justice, Voices Are Our Realities. He has a BA in International Affairs from Franklin and Marshall College, and an MA in Educational Leadership from the College of Notre Dame of Maryland. and an ED in Educational Leadership from the University of Delaware. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Malik Muhammad.
Thank you so very much, Shannon. I deeply and profoundly appreciate you and the Wilmington Center for Educational Equity and Public Policy. And I'm excited to be here tonight to share a few ideas. I'm calling in, I'm dialing in, I'm joining in from Delaware, which means that I am on the contested and unceded land of the Lenni, Lenape, and Nanticoke people who are part of the Delaware Nation. It is important for us to recognize and acknowledge the first harm on this land, and that is the genocide and the stealing and theft of the land of the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. So with that understood, I hope that it is okay that I and my fellow panelists came tonight to tell the truth, to provide some challenge and connection, to provide maybe a few practices that can help along the way as we begin to unpack and uncover some of what we mean by this adultification of Black and brown children. And so as we bring up the PowerPoint, I want to lean into some of the research by one of Delaware's own brilliant thinkers, and that is a colleague, Dr. Howard Stevenson. Dr. Howard Stevenson and his brother, Brian Stevenson, of course, have roots here in Delaware and Lower Delaware. And what Howard Stevenson has shown is that the research shows that when we experience a stressful situation, that we see Black and brown children as bigger than they really are, as closer than they really are, and older than they really are. Again, this is not just white folks, right? That this is all of us who are swimming in the stream of marginalization, who are swimming in the stream of white supremacy, right? That we all, in stressful situations, we see children of color as bigger than they really are, closer than they really are, and older than they really are. For me, this is the crux of this notion of adultification, right? That this lens in its most simplest form is really about ultimately treating our children, our Black and brown children, as though they are something else. Treating and seeing our Black and brown children as though they aren't children at all, as though they are more grown, more troubling, more feared, more to be objectified. In their male bodies, that looks like they are more of a monster or an athlete, something to be feared, to be controlled. In their female bodies, they are more sexualized and objectified and made to seem aggressive than what they really are. And what is really important here when we begin to understand this and unpack this tonight is that these misrecognitions, what makes them so challenging, so hostile to our beautiful babies, is that this gives license to those of us in the community and those of us in institutions, those of us in education, those of us in our own families. It gives us license to harm, to punish, to dehumanize, to malign, to isolate, to alternatively place, to remove from class our children because they are not children. They're not seen as children, but rather as smaller adults. So ultimately, what is the outcome? What are the impact? And Shannon, thank you for giving some of the data as it's relative to Delaware. If we pull and extract from some of that data, what the problem is that this coalesces into what we might refer to as the punitive approach, right? And the punitive approach has some very particular outcomes. In the next slide, we'll see those. This comes from the work of Dr. Victor Rios, who is a brilliant thinker out in Santa Barbara, California. And if we think about some of these, that the punitive approach for our Black and brown children creates what we could refer to as negative credentialing. Negative credentialing is the building up of, the continuous building up of credentials that are negative on one's life's journey. So for instance, the opposite of what we might put on a resume, it is, we can record the number of suspensions, the number of removals from class, the number of times in which you were deemed to be hostile to the learning environment, right? So that negative credentialing is what the punitive model ultimately produces. Also labeling and shame. That if the just world theory is true, and that is that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people, well then, if I've done something bad, then maybe I'm a bad person and something bad must happen to me. So therefore, we see these feelings of deviancy and outcast and labeling and shame for our children. We also see that school itself cannot be necessarily might not be a place of safety and stability. School itself might be a place of trauma where the enemy lives inside of the classroom, right? And so therefore, school is, in that classroom is a place where my survival brain kicks in, where I don't feel safe, where I'm fight, flight, or freeze. And that trauma responses get misrecognized as aggression, right? As deviancy, as oppositional defiance. The youth control complex is what Rios refers to as sort of this bending of forces of adults to control young people. And certain young people seem to be those who we view as needing more control or to be controlled more than others. And then, of course, you bring all of these together. And while young people, including myself, when I was a young person, I wanted agency, I wanted determination. As a teenager, I wanted to be able to have some control and say over my own life. But if I'm experiencing learned helplessness, if I'm experiencing this sense of marginalization, then what say do I have in my life? And I'll sometimes maladaptive behaviors in order to take that control. And so if you are going to, as a society, see me as an adult, then I'm going to try to act in that way, even if I don't have any preparation to do so, both intellectually, mentally, emotionally, or physically. There's something that Malcolm Gladwell introduced and made popular out into the world, and that was the 10,000-hour rule. And the 10,000-hour rule comes from the work of Erickson, where he asked the question, how long does it take to master something? How long does it take to become a master at something? And what was determined was essentially 10,000 hours of practice in order to master something. And so what I've thought about over the years is, well, how long does it take for our young people to experience a sense of helplessness, for them to master not being successful in our system, or more appropriately, for us to master failing them in many ways. So as we look at the next slide, what I think is powerful is that if we think about an average school day being 7 hours, now if you're a Black or brown student who's facing bias and discipline disproportionality, so that's 7 hours, average school year is 180 days, 8 years of negative credentialing since kindergarten, our Black and brown students can exceed their 10,000 hours by 7th grade. Now, why is that important? Because the data is pretty clear that many of our Black and brown students in the schools that are supposed to serve them are reaching their apex, the height of some of the most negative and challenging interactions in middle school. The data is pretty clear. The place where some of our students are getting arrested for the first time, middle school years. They're getting alternatively placed for the first time, middle school years. And so what the adultification of this work does, unfortunately, is that it hastens these 10,000 hours, so that some are meeting 10,000 hours in 4th grade, in 5th grade, in 3rd grade, right? And so what's really powerful is that we have created systems and structures, unfortunately, that are mastering the disservice of our young people. And the adultification, seeing them as adults, as smaller adults, and not as the children that they are, is really increasing how we are deciding to punish them in a very clear way. But I think that there's hope. I know that there is. I think the work that is happening out in the field, the work that I'm witnessing, the work that hopefully I'm contributing to a little bit, is showing that there is hope, that there are some bright spots. And my colleagues tonight will help to show some of the work that they're doing inside of their classrooms and schools. I think that a few important pieces that we need in order to begin to turn the tide is we need to rally and have some unity of thought and unity of action around some common terms. One of those is equity. You see, I think we need to move beyond just simply juxtaposing equity versus equality, I think we now need to do the right math. You see, I'm a child of the 80s and the 90s, right? And so the poor righteous teachers and others would always talk about doing the right math. And sometimes the right math is addition. Sometimes the right math is subtraction. Sometimes the right math is multiplication. Here's what I mean by that. If we look at this definition of equity, which I'd like to put forth as maybe an interesting one, is that equity means that all members of a community have what they need in order to be successful. Let me pause there. I didn't say anything brilliant there. Again, that definition is a layman's definition, that equity means that all members of the community have what they need in order to be successful. That means that we need to add some things in so that all members can be successful. But again, we need to do the right math. Sometimes it's addition, and sometimes we need to do subtraction. And that's the second part of the definition. While examining the structures, the policies, the procedures that perpetuate oppression and marginalization. In other words, y'all, what we need to do is we need to build up certain structures so that our students can actually have equity and equitable spaces are created. And we need to dismantle, deconstruct, destroy the things that created the inequity in the first place. I believe that the second part of that is hard work. I believe that the second part of that is where we push into and there's discomfort. Some people misrecognize and mislabel discomfort as being unsafe, and fragility shows up, right? But I think this work is going to require us to be brave, as my sister, Dr. Janine Dinovaish out of the University of Delaware charges us to be, and that is brave, to create brave community and brave spaces, right? So this work, especially that second part, is going to require us to be brave if we're going to end the adultification of our babies. There is an important relationship between theory and practice. Kwame Nkrumah says that theory without action is empty, and action without theory is blind. And so I'd like to offer, as we think about this way going forward, as it relates to restorative practices, I'd like to offer a theoretical framework, and that is the social discipline window. The social discipline window was not developed by Akoben, our organization. We'd like to offer that we added a little bit. We gave it a little remix, and we used the words challenge and connection. You see, sometimes we show up in the way that we're interacting with our children and the way we're interacting with each other is with low connection and low challenge. That is that we're showing up and we're barely there, right? That is that we're showing up in ways that we're just simply warm bodies, right? And we refer to that as the not box. Other times we're showing up with high challenge and low connection. That is that it's my way or the highway. I've got a program, I've got a plan, and my job is to execute on that. And you're simply just something to be controlled. You see, that's, I believe, the genesis of the adultification. And that is that we're seeing certain children, i.e. Black and brown children, as those who need to be treated in the two box. I'm going to use my authority to do something to you. Right. And so what's really important is for us to think about what are the outcomes, what are the impact of the two box. And then, of course, we also show up sometimes where it's high connection, a lot of understanding, a lot of relationship building, but very low challenge. That is that I don't see you as a human being worthy of you carrying your own weight. I don't often quote George Bush or any of the Bushes, but there's something that George W. Bush said that was brilliant, or a speechwriter wrote for him, and that is that there's a low expectation that we have, or excuse me, there's a soft bigotry in the low expectations that we have for minority students. So here's where we're also not seeing our children. Just like we can make an error to the right in adultification, we can, in the two box, we can also make an error to the left, and that is in not seeing them as human beings worthy of us challenging them. Again, connection plus challenge equals change. Optimally, we want to be in that with box, and that's high challenge, high connection. You're human, worthy of being valued. So that's a theoretical model. That's how we frame our thinking towards this work. And then the practices show up on a continuum. And in the next slide, you'll see on this continuum, they range from the most informal. These are things that we can do all day, every day, to the most formal. And that is the things that require more training, more support, and more time. The things above the arrow, those practices above the arrow are the proactive, and those practices below the arrow are the responsive, those that are designed to heal the hurt, to restore in order to repair the harm. The most important piece here is the word S in practices. There is no one single thing. What this is going to require is a combination, a cocktail approach of things, because we've got building, remember the addition, right? And we've also got some subtraction, the dismantling of structures, of policies, of ways of being inside of ourselves and outside of ourselves that we've got to get to work and do. So with that, Shannon, I want to turn it back over to you. I'm excited to hear what some of the other panelists are also going to contribute.
Wow, thanks, Malik. That was absolutely powerful. And I hope some of you guys who are interested are taking notes. We will make sure that we have this PowerPoint. The PowerPoint's available for you all after the fact. Powerful information. And, you know, honestly, though, each of those concepts can be taught in a full day or more, right? And then each of those concepts will require coaching, because what folks need to realize is that restorative practice is a way of being, right? It's a practice. It's not something that you add. It's not something that, you know, you have to add on. Okay, we're going to be restorative right now for 5 minutes. No, it's how we approach our lives. It's how we connect with others. And it does take practice. So thank you, Malik. I certainly appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to hearing more from you as we go forward. Next, I want to introduce two of our guest panelists as well, two esteemed guests. Equity Jones. Equity Jones is an assistant principal at Highlands Elementary in the Red Clay School District. She has received numerous awards and recognition over the course of her career. Most recently, she was awarded the 2018 Delaware Assistant Principal and the 2020 NAESP National Assistant Principal of the Year, 2021 Life Changer of the Year nominee. Ms. Jones was recently appointed to the Delaware Association of School Principals Board and is a Delaware Trauma-Informed Care Cadre member. Currently, Ms. Jones conducts book studies for assistant principals, which promote the implementation of trauma and poverty-informed practices. Jones believes that every school deserves a champion. Equetta, thank you for joining us.
Hello.
We also have Khayree Bay. Khayree is the 2021 Colonial School District Teacher of the Year, 2020 Lieutenant Governor Challenge Wellness Leadership Award. He's also 2019 SHAPE Delaware's Health Teacher of the Year. Bay was recently appointed to the Delaware Standards Board and is on Delaware State Education Association trainer cadre. Currently, Bay implements an equity-based trauma and poverty-informed social and emotional learning approach to teaching, Kemetic, yoga, and other self-care practices. Bay also serves on two of his school district's anti-racist equity teams, the Educators of Color Council, which focuses on equity and the underrepresentation population in teaching by recruiting, assisting, and maintaining educators of color, and the Equity Audit Committee, which identifies and addresses diversity, equity, and inclusion issues to better serve all students in the community. Welcome, Khayree.
Thank you, Frank.
All right, so we want to dig right into this. So we know that with this pandemic, right, schools have been out and now some schools are hybrid, and we're anticipating that schools will be back at least 4 or 5 days, at least 4 days come the fall. I want to know, what have you guys, this is a question to Equetta and Khayree, what have you all seen in your students, right, that would reflect kind of, you know, what they're feeling or how they're able to share their emotions or not with what's the, you know, the traumatic experience that we're having with this pandemic? Equetta, we'll go to you first.
Okay, so, you know, our scholars are very connected to many of our staff. So, you know, what we jumped on immediately was making sure we continued with that connection. And so I think in our building, we don't see some of the effects that are occurring in many other buildings with the disconnection, because our families and our scholars know that we're right there in the forefront. We're very proactive in thinking and knowing that our students already struggle with abandonment issues and disconnection. And if we weren't there to support them, that would expand itself. So we, right from the front, just started going out, knocking on doors. I hand wrote 310 letters to every single scholar in our building and mailed them to them, just so that they knew that we were still here. And matter of fact, it's funny, I just got a letter in the mail return from a family saying, Ms. Jones, we love those letters. We appreciate it. You know, you see us even though we don't see you. So I think that really helped us. But I will say some of our scholars did, especially the ones that are still remote, are feeling the strain and the pull because they don't have that human connection. You know, even our guidance counselor, our school psychologist tried to meet with them virtually, but it's not the same as it is with that touch, especially with knowing a number of our scholars had losses due to COVID. And then on top of that, you also have the norm, unfortunately, that we're dealing with the city of Wilmington. So I think for us, our students that are in person are faring better just because we're there. You know, I had a student run to me today, give me a big old hug, Ms. Jones, I just love you, you know, and they need that because many times that's where they get it from, is from the school building and we're their people. So, you know, I think our kids, they're resilient, but we're a part of that resilience.
Khayree.
First, let me say thank you for having me on this panel. Secondly, a lot of times, home is where the trauma begins. So the students are missing that positive serve and return that they rely on at school. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 meals. So I noticed a lot of our kids, when they came back, they had that look of, I'm glad to see you. It's been rough. You know what I mean? I've always said that students come to school with an invisible backpack. And in that backpack comes a lot of issues that many teachers aren't equipped to deal with. I think with this pandemic, though, I think everyone in the field of education was missing the building also. So when we all showed up there, it was that familiar face, it was that familiar stage for everybody to be on. And many kids, like Ms. Jones said, the ones that are face-to-face, because we're back face-to-face 5 days a week, at least in the middle school in Colonial, those kids came back and you can tell that they needed that positive serve and return. They needed to have somebody really there. They needed that interaction. I think one of the biggest things that we keep hearing is about the academic loss. And I'm not really too concerned about the academic loss. It's the social emotional loss that we really need to put in check, because you can't teach a person how to live through a pandemic. And that's what our students just went through. That's what we went through as a community, as a world, to be honest. Right. So when I see our students walk through those doors and you see those smiles and you see the parents when they're dropping them off, waving, this is something that they definitely needed. And I don't think you can dismiss, like Ms. Jones was saying, what goes on in the city. Also on the Route 9 corridor here in Newcastle here, we get the Riverside kids and Oakmont, and you know, they are struggling right now. And you know, the different issues that are going nationally, which have always been there. It just seems that now, because of the pandemic, a lot of it has been brought to light, but the systemic issues that have plagued generations for well beyond mine, and I'm 50 this year, and I'm glad to see that these type of things have been pushed to the forefront, because the way I see it, this is an easy topic to talk about now in a lot of these districts. The thing is now that it's starting to simmer down, now we've elected some people that they're going to try to work in our interests here, but let's not fool ourselves. This is not work. This is a lifestyle. And it's either you about it or you not.
Right, that's right. Carter, you brought up something, and Malik, I want to give you a chance to respond. She mentioned connections, right? And this whole idea of engaging students and seeing students for who they are and valuing them and respecting them and recognizing their gifts and talents cannot be done without connection. Like you don't do any of this work without building those kind of relationships. And so I'll go into our next question. I'll give you a chance to respond, Malik. What is needed to improve the school culture and climate for Black and Brown students that helps to foster and build those connections and those type of relationships that we know are so essential to this work?
Yeah, so I think I do just want to go back and really big up what Equity and Khayree mentioned. And Khayree, you talk about, we've got to lean into each other, right? And so the invisible backpack that young people have, and we acknowledge that adults, we have our own invisible backpack, right? That impacts learning and culture, right? And then also I think about, I read somewhere or saw somewhere where it said that we're not in the same boat. We're in the same storm, right? Some of us have yachts, some of us have a rowboat, and some of us have nothing, right? Now, on a surface level, that's easy to recognize that we're talking about resources, right? But also we're talking about skill set, right? And that some of us have a yacht full of skills, right? Mindfulness and yoga, right? And trauma-informed practices that we're able to lean into when times are hard, right? And that's what we're trying to build up inside these young people and ourselves. And others have a rowboat. They've got they're resource rich and their skill set poor, right? Mm-hmm. So they've got a rowboat or less, right, of skills. And so what we're trying to do is build some of that up. And to your point, Shannon, and to Equity, I think that the way that we can fast track relationship building, if there is a way to fast track, right? I think there is at least some accelerant. The fast track way is that is the path of vulnerability. And when it comes to vulnerability, we got to go first. Mm-hmm. We got to go first, right? We cannot ask a 5-year-old or a 15-year-old to be vulnerable with us if we are unwilling to do that. We cannot ask any question of them that we're not willing to answer. And so for me, it's that path is we got to share stories, we got to seek stories, right, in order to find that area of connection so we can build the connection and then use that to challenge.
Great. So that's a perfect segue into this next clip that we want to show when we talk about sharing the stories and being vulnerable, right? Because that can happen in a multitude of ways, but we have to be really purposeful about making sure that it happens, right? And so one of the ways through restorative practices that we know it can be done is through what we call circles. And so I want everyone to get a chance to see what a circle could look like. And this circle is actually led by high school students at Met West High School in the Oakland Unified School District. So I want to jump right into it. This will be a circle in progress, but you'll get to see kids being vulnerable and their educator being vulnerable as well, right? So let's take a look.
What's good about being a teenager?
You get more freedom now.
You get to know people really deeply.
If you look back on your childhood, you realize that there's certain things that you couldn't do when you were that age.
You get the taste of being an adult.
Man.
So, yeah, you're like...
I mean, I find it balanced to be serious and be funny. If we're saying something that's, sad, that just changes the whole direction of the circle. So, I mean, eventually somebody has to say something to make the circle, bring back to life, because if it's sad, nobody's going to want to talk again.
And sort of like letting the circle alternate between serious and light. We can laugh in certain moments. We can allow this to become lighter so that we also stay more resilient in the circle. And laughing with them is really important. And it also shows I respect all of who they are.
What's hard about being a teenager?
Sometimes you just want to do stuff that you think you're ready for, but then when really you're not, and you just want to grow up too fast sometimes.
When you're a child, you know how you're always so happy and stuff like that. Now you're a teenager and you know what stuff's happening in the world and you feel sadder. I don't remember being happy. The closest time I remember that was when I was 6, so. The one thing I hate about being a teenager is you can't be as happy as you were as a kid.
I remember really wanting to leave home from really the time I started high school. I had to just sit with it and wait until I was old enough to leave the house, even though I wasn't necessarily ready.
I have more responsibilities now. Take care of my little brother and family members and everything. So it's really harder now.
You have to learn how to say things without getting in trouble, or like the right way how to say it without like getting an attitude. Before I came to Midwest, I didn't have no self-control. Like in class, I was the class clown, and I never listened to my teachers. Getting suspended, I never cared. And every time I got a phone call home, I used to lie and say, she lying, I never did that. When I'm in a circle, I feel opened up. The circles is a part of me treating people better because I see how people are when people open up, and I see how they're treated, and I know I wouldn't want nobody to treat me like that.
They come into the room with 9 years of experience of this is what kind of student I am. And I just think that's the power of a circle. You are exactly who you are as you are in relationships with your peers. Someone who she doesn't get to be most of the time.
You can control yourself. You don't need nobody to tell you to stop. You know if you right or wrong.
If you could change one thing about being a teenager, what would it be?
Everyone should have a mentor, not only about your schoolwork, but like what goes on in your house.
They're wondering why teenagers are becoming more and more obese, and it's because they don't feed us healthier foods.
School should be more interactive because the best way to learn is hands-on.
They still see us like we're little kids, but they don't know what's going on in our minds. They don't know if we're maturing.
What are the things teenagers can do to make a difference in their lives or others?
Think about things twice before you do anything. That was my lesson learned. Because if I would have thought about it the second time, I've probably never been in the trouble I'm in.
Don't be so negative. Once you're negative around people, people get negative too. If you're positive, then everybody around you going to be more positive, even if they're around, like their household is negative.
Her ability to build relationships with her peers, to allow me to know her more deeply, to allow other people to help harness her energy of this is the kind of student I am, I think it's allowed her to stay here.
So we're going to do the closing ceremony. Because you have an opening one, so why not have a closing one? I mean, you have to close it out with something good. This little basket is going to go around. Everybody will pick a name. And then you say appreciation.
I want to appreciate Alfredo because you're hella nice.
I appreciate Matthew. You're a good friend, and I know I can trust you with stuff.
I want to appreciate you because you're really nice and you're really fun to hang out with, and you did a good job leading this.
I appreciate Sarah because this whole week and last week, Sarah's just been making me laugh, and she just got a good attitude, and she's so helpful. She helps me whenever I need help. I see her like a sister.
I want to appreciate Pancho for staying strong after going through a lot and having to wear that and being under house arrest and not being able to go out.
I want to appreciate you because on everything you do, you always give it 120%. And you really just express yourself in everything you do. And yeah, best friend.
Thanks. So, that video is just, I've seen it a lot of millions of times, right? And it's always so powerful for me because you see teenagers being vulnerable, and that doesn't happen overnight, right? That class had been meeting for almost the entire school year before they got to that point of vulnerability. So, it's something that you just do on an ongoing basis. And I would like to hear from you guys. One thing when I'm talking to teachers, right, educators about doing these kinds of circles in their classrooms, one of the main things I get as far as the pushback is I don't have time to do that, right? I got to get through these pacing guides. I've got so many responsibilities. I don't have time. And then I asked them, I said, well, how many of you spend too much time in redirecting, right? And how many of you, if you could get time back to do from redirecting, you could actually do more teaching? Inevitably, 90% of the hands go up, right? And so I'm like, well, if you build these kind of relationships in your classroom that foster this kind of vulnerability and openness, there's less that you have to do in redirection because there's more connection. Students will begin to hold themselves accountable, right? And their colleagues and their friends accountable. And so the circles are a really powerful way, I think. We talk about a fast track, right? There's no magic bullet in any of this work. Please don't get us a misunderstood audience. There's no magic bullet. But if we talk about how do we create those spaces to have that connection and build those relationships and to be vulnerable and have a place where students can be seen, circles is a great example, a way to do that. I want to give you guys a chance to kind of weigh in on circles if you've done them in your classroom, in your schools, and some of the benefits of what you've seen from them. We'll go with you, Khayree.
I have not personally done circles, but do different, I have my own little tools and tricks that I've used. We kind of, in the district, we've gotten into this restorative practice with responsive classroom. Now, there's things about responsive classroom I like, and then there's certain things that I don't. But is what it does create is a time for the teacher and the students to kind of link up and share experiences, share likes, and all of a sudden you create that positive serve and return. And when it becomes a habit, it becomes over and over, the repetition really sinks in. And when you start doing it earlier in elementary, by the time you get to high school and middle school times, it becomes natural. It is that 10,000 repetitions where all of a sudden, to the point where now we have kids that are coming out of elementary into middle school, and if you don't do the advisory right, they'll call you out because they've actually experienced this. This is part of their routine. For me, it was mindfulness and kind of getting them to meditate together, also getting into being present. So for my students, I kind of do this mindful ninja. You recognize what your triggers are. Once you recognize your triggers, you get into, I call it's a stop sign back there. Stop, take a breath, analyze the situation, focus on a positive future with you in it, and then you use your shield. And your shield is, once you find out what your triggers are, you first take that deep breath, because you're trying to put a little bit of space between your response, your reaction after you've been triggered. And that space in between there gives, the young man said, I wish if I thought about it twice, or I had a little bit more time to think about it. That's that lower part of the brain. That's your instincts and your emotions kicking in. And once you teach the youth that, it becomes easier for them to sit in a circle, to sit in an advisory, because they understand themselves, and all of a sudden empathy comes in instead of apathy that they might be dealing with out in the neighborhoods, or when they're coming into school and being judged for their shirt being too short or a dress code violation, and you've been in fight or flight all night, you're ready to flare off. So when you give these opportunities for students to really get to know themselves first, then it's easier for them to adapt to everyone else. And it has to start with teachers, because if they don't have these practices also, if they're in there flipping their lids, it doesn't matter what the child is doing. So even with that circle, you got to have an adult that's running that has the skills to be able to pull this off when they check their biases, conscious and unconscious. So it's not just the student, it's the teacher that has to be able to facilitate something like this. And that's something that should be in teacher training. I know we get the walkthroughs and the lesson plans, but to be honest, most teachers come out of these institutions not ready to deal with our children.
Equata?
So as an assistant principal, I use circles in my office daily. I feel like what is done for our scholars is help them to become more self-aware, and then also gives them the ability to self-manage when they're in the classroom, and then also really think about how they're going to make the next decision. What is going to be my next action instead of my next reaction? So really trying to teach them how to be proactive, and then also even modeling some of my emotions and some of my responses to them when we're talking through systems. And I will say at this point, you're talking about having first and second graders who can sit in a circle and can express themselves and how they feel and apologize for the actions or the harm that they may have caused another peer. And now, our kindergartners, even though we've been in COVID, our kindergartners can do the same thing. I'm sorry I made you feel this way when I didn't show you my picture. And they really, and they it's a part of the culture, and it's really taking the time to be thoughtful and to listen and to hear what their other colleagues / peers have to say or how they feel. So I'm a big proponent to it. We're getting there in our building, but I will say the kids now know how to do it themselves. So they mirror it within their classrooms versus having to come to Ms. Jones's office.
Malik, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just a few things. I think it's important for us to recognize that being in a circle does not restorative make, right? Sometimes the best that we're doing is just sitting in a circle. And all of our other stuff in our invisible backpack shows up, right? So Khayree obviously, showed that there's other stuff that goes into this work besides just sitting in a circle, right? Dr. Wallington reminds us that, self-regulation comes from co-regulation, right? And that we need adults who are going to regulate emotionally using their prefrontal cortex and their amygdalas and firing, all of that stuff, right? But circles are powerful though, right? They're the most ancient democratic structure that our ancestors gave us, right? They come from the cultures of Black and brown people and traditional communities. And it's a beautiful structure that is itself an act of equity, right? Because it gives people the opportunity to have all voices heard, right? It gives us listen, one proof in the pudding for using circles is that it's an opportunity for all students in your classroom to actually have a voice. I promise you that there are many times that we execute good lesson plans and not all students are participating. And we don't have to look far. We don't even have to look to Oakland, right? There's great examples of that in every single school district here in Delaware. I don't want to say every school district, a lot of school districts here in Delaware, right? Let me be real, that I tell the truth, right? But, for instance, in William Penn, I witnessed a beautiful circle in an ESL classroom with about 30 some students. They were stuffed. They had 6 countries represented in maybe a dozen languages. And it was a beautiful 15-minute circle. So to your point, Shannon, either we're going to take the time to build relationships and challenge each other, or the time is going to take us, right? And it's going to show up in suspensions, in referrals. So either you can spend time writing a referral, or you can spend time learning how to do circles and other ways of connecting.
Right. So one of the questions that came up in the chat was, and I'll direct this to you, Equity, since you are an assistant principal in a building. What do you do when the teacher is the trigger or the teacher is not open to restorative practices?
You model.
Okay.
You model. And it goes back to that whole upstairs brain, downstairs brain, and whether or not the teacher is dysregulated, and also really understanding your audience. As an assistant principal, you walk into a classroom, you should know who your staff is or are. You should be able to identify where they are and what may be causing them to react in the manner in which they may be doing so. So, as a leader, that's the number one thing you need to do. But then when you get in there, there's times when I've walked in classrooms and the staff would tell you, I'll say, not right now. Thank you. Okay. And smile. And, we come back and I take the students and we have a conversation and I hear them. I have to listen to that student voice. And even though some of the teachers may be a trigger at that time, there's times where I can be a trigger. I'm not going to deny that. It's after we've had the conversation, what's next? This is what I heard. This is what you heard. Now, where are we going to go from there? And what I've seen now is a lot of those triggers are starting to diminish. I'm not going to lie to you. They're not going. By far.
Right. Yeah.
No.
We're not robots, right? We're human beings.
We're humans. But I will say there's certain teachers now that when you walk into the classroom, you see them take a deep breath and really think about it and then talk to the student and pull them over in a corner, have a conversation. Or sometimes they'll just call and say, Ms. Jones, I need you to come right now because I don't know how to deal with this. And then it's very important for me as assistant principal to, after I have those conversations, go back and wrap around with the staff member and say, these are some of the strategies that I use with this scholar. Maybe you can try. Or what, there's been times where I've actually had a teacher and a scholar and myself in a circle. And we've actually hashed out their situation and let them both be heard. And with that, they develop bonds because now they have understanding of each other.
Right. Powerful, powerful stuff. Powerful, powerful.
If-
So,
and if I can,
Khayree, sure.
Yeah, and we also have to be patient, y'all. Our alarm clock just woke us up yesterday, right? If we write off teachers and staff members who aren't really about this work yet, then I would have been written off the first 5 years of my teaching career, right? And so we're all on this journey. It's not an event. And so I think that that's important, right? Because if we can have patience for people that are 15 years old, we need to have it for them when they're 35 too, right?
Right. Very good point.
Can I add that I think we should have it also that it comes from the top. Many teachers that have these great tools, they have it in their toolbox to do it. And we all have our classrooms, and you do what you do to your best in there. But when it comes from superintendents and school boards, that this is what we're going to be about, it adds so much more power to the teachers that are doing it. And the ones that aren't on board are kind of, you're caught, the train goes by, they grab on and they go along with the train, because that's what it is. It's been the opposite. We've done it wrong for so long, and we went along with it from the top down. So that when it comes from the top down, it makes it so much more powerful, and it has more of a staying power, sustainable.
So, Khayree, you mentioned mindfulness, right? And that's a form of social emotional learning. But I want you to explain to our audience, what is social emotional learning? If you can give us the 5-cent definition of what it is.
It's understanding your environments. That's the social, where you're coming from, where you're at, and where you're going. And emotional, again, is you dealing with your inner self. When I teach them that mindful ninja, I give them a shield, and the shield starts off with them breathing and creating that space between trigger and response. But then after that, they're checking in with their emotions. How do I feel right now? Then go back to breathing. They're not checking your thoughts. Where's my thoughts at the moment? And then from there, where's my body at? How do I feel in my body? So when you get all of those together, you allow that student, you allow them to gain a insight that carries them on past the
incident itself.
Yeah, the incident itself. It gives them that tool, that power, almost like a superpower. And when you're that young, you've never been taught those skills. And those skills are what actually carries them to the next stage.
Great. So, Equity, how does your building incorporate SEL, social emotional learning practices in your building?
So in the past, we've been identified as a PATHS model school, which of course is a curriculum. So, no curriculum covers everything, but I think as a building, it is crucial to have a starting point. So we have PATHS as a starting point, and then we meet with our PBS team and our.
Let me stop you there.
Sorry,
Positive behavior
support team. I caught it. Our positive behavior support team. We meet with our problem solving team, which is also identified as the PST team, and we identify next steps. So we have 3 R's in our building, which are respectful, responsible, and ready. It's funny, one of the teachers was like, why? Well, it's based on behaviors that you see within the building. You create a matrix on how you're going to respond to those specific behaviors. And we want to be more proactive and restorative versus punitive. So that's why we focus on those positive behaviors in the front. So what we do is we have PATHS, and every teacher has it. They have a PATHS kit of the day. Well, we kick it to the next step. And we also have a staff member that get acknowledgement as well. So it is modeled on multiple levels in multiple arenas. I will say PATHS really sticks well in our K-1-2, classes, but in 3, 4, 5, we've had to supplement with book studies and really digging deeply into gaining a deeper understanding of how to communicate effectively with each other. Because then 3rd and 4th and 5th grade, you're testing, tempers are really flaring. You've got all those other emotions going on, and they happen a little earlier now than they used to. So we do have other things that we have to look at, but it's a lot of work between the assistant principal, the school psychologist, and also our guidance counselor, just to really ensure that we're focusing on the social emotional well-being of all of our scholars and not just waiting for those explosive moments, but teaching them how to respond before they get there. And even modeling. I mean, you know, we use Turtle in our building a lot. And there's sometimes I'll say to the students,
break down Turtle. What's Turtle? Break it down for us. Okay.
So I'll say to the students, oh my goodness, Miss Jones is so frustrated right now because we have all these filling cards. And they know what that means because we teach them in kindergarten what these different emotions are. So, and I'll say, well, when I'm frustrated, I just need the Turtle. I need to take a deep breath. And then I need to reflect on the situation. And turtling could be hugging myself. It could be putting my head down. It could be hiding myself. It could be putting my hood over me, just so that I have a minute to reflect. And then when I'm ready, I can have a conversation. And so they've seen adults turtle because they're like, I just can't right now because you're going to make me lose my mind. Okay, stop. But they understand that it's natural to have these emotions, and that's what you want your children or scholars to feel. You want them to know it is acceptable to feel this way, but let me model to you how I should react. And there's times where I have to go, Miss Jones, and I'm banging it. Okay, now how does that look to you? Mm-hmm. And then they're like, Miss Jones, that looks a mess. Why? Because Miss Jones had to learn how to regulate herself when she becomes frustrated. So that's a big thing, just modeling it, using the curriculum to start. But it can't just be we're reading a book. You have to live, breathe, and sleep, eat, everything, the restoration of your emotion regulation. You have to, because if not, it's no point of doing it.
Right. Malik, you want to chime in and give us a little bit, some more examples of practices of SEL?
Yeah, I think though, from if we just step back and from a historical perspective, schools have always adopted some form of character education, right? Mm-hmm. It's always been there. And when the educational institution is completely aligned as a capitalist organization and a capitalist institution and patriarchy, right? Then it's about how do we churn out compliant citizens, those who aren't going to question very much, those who are going to go to work, right? Ask very little, mm-hmm. right? But what we're really talking about with SEL, and this is where SEL has the potential to even be revolutionary, is that we're asking how do we need to show up in community, including community with ourselves, mm-hmm. right? So when I can turtle, in other words, make the world small in order for me to have my emotional regulation come in, right? So that I can come back out into the community that's big, right? Then that's really about how do we show up as the best version of ourselves, right? And that, to me, social emotional learning is not just the lessons, but it's the practices that we're teaching, right? Young people and ourselves, right? To do this work. This is much, much, much different than the citizenship, right?
Right.
How to vote or financial literacy. Important, yes, not as important as how do we actually have healthy relationships with ourselves and other people in the community, I think.
Absolutely. Well, this is powerful stuff. So we talked about how schools can embed these practices. We give some practical examples of what it would look like. We talked about how students can help to lead some of that work through circles. How can we involve parents in this process, and what is their responsibilities? And we'll go with Equity first this time.
Okay, so it goes back to modeling. It's the first thing you have to do. If you want something to be done and you want it to be done correctly, or the way that you assume it to be done correctly, you model it. And so for us, it's we do social emotional nights. We've done this year a lot of yoga and deep breathing through Zoom, and really connected our families and modeled to them what this looks like, what these conversations look like. There's been times where I've had to say, let's have a conversation. I understand this is your norm. However, we have to teach our scholars that there's a certain way that we have to deal with things while we're in school. And not will it just help them in school, but it will help them as a child and as a whole child. And then parents are like, okay, we all have, I will say this, like my son, I will admit, I was one to be like, I will yoke you up, boy. Like, what are you doing? Are you kidding me? But having those stories to say, now I can go to my child and say, Okay, what happened?
Mm-hmm.
And when they say, oh, well, this or that, okay, what did that look like?
Mm-hmm.
What was your response?
Right.
What relationships did you damage while this was occurring? So we handle things a lot differently versus I'm just going to bust your butt because the teacher called me and told me you did this, and I know the teacher not lying on you, and never hear the voice of the child, even though there are children. Or the flip, my child don't lie, my child don't say this, my child don't say that. Okay, well. Let's talk it through and let's have an understanding. I will be honest, there is a student in our building that we had a situation, and I said today, that child would never do that.
Mm-hmm.
Guess what? The culture and the relationship that we had, she said, Miss Jones, I did it. And I was like, you did what? And I was in shock. I was in awe. But she realized that she could be honest with me, one, that she could be transparent. And she also knew that we would call mommy together and have the conversation. And now the relationship that mom has with the school, we were going to build and grow her, not break her down. And that's very important. Parents have to know, one, that we're a team. And I always say to my parents, I have never had a child fail as long as we were on one accord. And my thing is, failure is not an option for Ms. Jones. So if we do what we need to do together, your child will do nothing but excel and succeed. Every child deserves a champion, and we have to have that mindset. And even with my family now, they're always like, 1 minute you're saying it's trauma, 1 minute you're saying it's behavior. There's a thin line between love and hate, but it's just really us understanding where the child is and what we need to do as their adults that they trust.
Right. Khayree, you want to jump in with how we can engage parents in this process?
Yes.
Again, these are skills that they didn't necessarily learn, right? They may not have been raised that way. So how do we involve them in this process?
I think you create a strong community to school connection, because you got to remember, these are, at least I'm in a public school. And the public school is for the public. So when you have events that put teachers and parents in the same room and create an environment where they can enjoy each other's presence. That was one of the things that I did, having mindful nights with some of our leaders throughout the district. Also creating different times and places where their child gets to shine. Not every child shines in the classroom. So you have talent shows, and you're a teacher, you show up to those talent shows. Parents show up, that's their baby. That's their baby that may be the kid that's acting out in your class is now up there performing. You as a teacher, you get to go there. This parent gets to see you supporting their child. And all of a sudden, it's a natural occurring circle. You have sports. I coach 3 sports. And the sports that our brown and black children don't play. Wrestle, field hockey, and softball. You know what I mean? So a lot of my little girls like, I'm not putting that helmet on, messing my hair up. I'm like, you are today. You getting on that mat and wrestling. Those type of moments to see them shine. All of a sudden, that kid that was giving you lip in class, all of a sudden sees you sitting there and goes, you know what? You came to my game yesterday. That parent sees that. Right. Another way you do it is the way you address parents when you call home. Give them a positive. You know, your child has been doing pretty good this year, but today, there was an incident. And how can we work together? Again, you're creating a place. And again, these are the skills that they don't teach them in college. And this also is because representation matters. We have to start sticking us in front of our students also. Right. And then those other teachers can see and learn from the way you interact with these children.
Right. Sorry, go ahead, Khayree.
I just did we had testing last week. And one of my superpowers in the district is I'm not just a teacher, I'm a parent. So I don't leave here and go back to some other place and talk about those kids. And when I see these kids, I'm making sure that I'm identifying with them. I'm using things that are hip to them. Now, if that's not your strong point, you can't do that, then by no means don't do that. But bring your true and honest self to it. Be vulnerable and let that parent see who you are, so that they can go ahead and get to know you better, just like you want to get to know them better. Again, it's you create opportunities for the 2 parties, 3 parties involved to find that link together to see that you have more in common than you do different. Absolutely. So that's what that's.
Maximizing the moments is what I call them. Malik, you want to add to this?
Yeah, and Khayree, I want to spotlight, you know, your emphasis on representation, right? And beyond symbolism, right? Beyond just, you know, surface level, right? So representation, so position and authority, right? Those things matter, right? And we need to that's a whole nother conversation that we ought to have, right? I think, look, we're at a special moment in history where for the past 14 months, there's been blurred lines between parents and teachers, right? Parents have had a front row seat to their children learning or not learning, right? More than any other time in history, I would argue, right? And so now we've got to seize on that, right? And actually really invite in and continue to have that circle of wraparound support for our young people, right? And I would like to just add that that we have a responsibility to also be open to learning from parents themselves, right? The beautiful thing about the 40 developmental assets is that invites in caretakers and parents and other adults and the youth themselves to recognize what the assets are. We'll never be able to know a student's assets unless we invite in the parents and the families, right? Because that can give us, look, I had a young person who was a headache, y'all. He was just, he was a challenge, right? And I deal with challenging young people. I operate in that space. But it wasn't until I saw him at his church that I realized that he was a little usher and he was in the band at the church, right? And I met his pastor. It wasn't until that, because I thought he was on a whole look, I know he was touched with some evil, right? That's what I was thinking in my mind. Come to find out, right?
Be honest, right?
Right, he had a journey inside of him. And by allowing that, right, that opportunity for that relationship, I could see him for the human being that he was, not the object that I was building him up to be, right? And then also parents have a level of insight that we could really build from. I know what Malik looks like when he's a level 1 and when he's a level 10. Because he's a level 10, I'm going in, CPI, all of that, right? Crisis Prevention Institute training, right? Restraint, all of that stuff, right? Right? Because that's where he is, right? I need to know, what does he look like at a level 5, at a level 6? When his eyebrows go up at a 17-degree angle, mom or pop, what do you do? Right? And then what can I learn from that, right? And then we can learn from each other. But inviting them in, if nothing else, they're an expert on their child, right? And so I want to invite them in to teach me, right? And I'll teach you some things too. So.
Awesome. All right. So we talked about what parents can do. What can the community do to try to get more of this, more of these resources and supports and training? Because Khayree said a lot of our educators are coming to our school buildings. They didn't get this in teacher preparation programs too many times, right? So how can we as the school community make sure that these kinds of things that we talked about today are being brought to bear in their school buildings and in their district? What can the community do to advocate for this? We'll go with Malik first.
Yeah, I think the community, one, I think we need to apply pressure to exclusionary practices, right? I think that the children belong to the community, don't belong to these institutions, right? And so as such, if we've got a man who has walked a certain walk, right, has gotten in trouble but come out on the other side transformed, we need the community to push through exclusionary practices that keeps that individual out of schools, right? Because they've had this charge or that charge, right? Let's do all the screening in order to make sure that they can be a mentor that can connect with young people, right? But let's push through that. So I think we need community to push through some of the barriers, right? I think we also need to, and Dr. Darrell Green out of Red Clay, this was part of his dissertation. We need a clearinghouse for the people that want to come in and support schools, because all help ain't good help, right? So we need to be able to have some quality indicators that if you have this program, what is it going to be a value add to the young people in the school environment or otherwise? So those are just two things.
Equity, what can the community do?
I would have to agree with Malik, really paying attention to what's working well. I so often, being an assistant principal, I get phone calls. Well, let's try this and let's do this and let's do that. Oh, we have this magic pill that's going to change everything in your building. Oh, really? And so really digging deep and paying attention to what is happening around you and what is working well with the population that you're supporting. because each of us have a very different culture in our buildings, a very different culture in the community. So what is going to work well in the community and for the scholars that you serve is what's important. You know, I remember when I was in the classroom, we did the Arts Alliance. Worked great for our scholars. A lot of people counted our babies out, but when it came to that musical talent, they didn't even realize they were learning fractions. So it's that, and that also helped with the behavior,
right?
Because they knew they had something that they could relate to and that they can feel and they can understand. And then it made some of us come out of our comfort zones and started to sing with them and play guitars and all the type of different talents that we have within the school. So I think, you know, in the community, so many times, I think also taking the lens of judgment off. This school can't. Those kids can't. They won't. They're not able to. You hear it so much that it becomes a part of the culture,
the mantra,
of the
right?
Building. And then you're constantly trying to dismantle this musical instrument that has been created to determine who the children are within your building. I have a leading ladies group, and I always tell my girls, who defined you? And they're like, well, this one, no. I define me, not society. And so the thing is so many times we look at a school building and we automatically assume that everything within that building or within that structure is unable to do things without going in and finding out what really is going on and how we can support to shift the mold and the expectation.
Khayree, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes. One of the main things that I would say is get involved with the school board. There's a lot of power in the school board. You don't realize how much power the school board has. And again, representation matters. Run for things. Understand your local government that controls the funding that goes on in your school district. Find out who your school district superintendent is, deputy superintendents, assistant superintendents. Then find out what the structure is in your school. Do they have deans? Do they have APs, assistant principals? Do they have school psychologists? How many? Is it meeting the number of students that need the resource? You have to be involved. I mean, we get really worked up to elect presidents, but we don't get worked up to elect school board members that control what happens to your child on an everyday basis. So make sure that you understand, join those, the student parent PTA, join those different organizations, find out the structure that your child spends 12 years in and becomes institutionalized. Make sure you understand what goes on in there and the structure of what's going on. Don't just go off of good faith that you're going in there and your child is getting the best education that they're getting, because to be honest, the public school system is real. The data shows it. If we're going to get it right, it's not going to get right on its own because the system's been broken at best. And here we are now trying to point out the inequities that have been going on for generations. So make sure you're involved. Make sure you understand the politics that are going on, and make sure you know where the funding is going.
And realize that you have power, you have voice. And when you work collectively, that voice gets even stronger and the power becomes even more.
That's
so
right.
Which is one of the reasons why I think the center is, important, because what we want to do is help galvanize those voices, right? And mobilize the power that we have in community to affect the kind of changes that we want to see. So I would encourage everyone to go to the DOE website, look up their climate pages, see where your schools are, if they're part of the corrective action plan. And if not, great. But get into those school buildings, talk to the teachers, talk to, as Khayree said, talk to the AP assistant principals or the deans, get engaged, get involved, ask those questions. And then find another parent to go with you, right? Because again, we do better together. And when we mobilize collectively is when we can really impact and affect change. So with that, I've got one last question for you guys. If you've got to identify one thing that would improve educational outcomes for Black and Brown students, what would it be? And we'll go with Dr. Muhammad. One thing.
So I believe that if we had one thing that we ought to allow the people, we should empower the people to lead. In other words, those who are most marginalized, those who are most made silent, those who are most impacted. And in every school that exists, that means that we're talking about more young people than adults. So one thing is to empower, co-power young people to have a voice and to make significant decisions. And if we keep asking them to do that, eventually they'll stop giving us answers that they want us to hear, and they'll start giving us the truth because they'll start to believe that we're listening.
Powerful. All right, who wants to go next? One thing.
Can I add on? I'll go next. I'll add on to Dr. Muhammad's beautiful words right there. Again, it's power, empowering our students' voice. I think Huey P. Newton said it. Power is the ability to recognize a phenomenon and get it to work in a desired manner. And that's what our students need to be given or taught how to have and maintain, is that their voice matters. And you start it from the earliest age so that by the time they get to middle school and high school, they are advocates for themselves and they can tell you what they need instead of being just indoctrinated into a system that has not met their needs or their community's needs. And that's why we get a lot of kickback.
Powerful. All right, Ms. Jones, bring it on in for us.
So my lovely brothers have already said it all, you know, but all I would add to is once we empower and we activate that leadership within, is really cultivating it. And, you know, I keep going back to my leading ladies group, but that's the expectation. How are we going to sustain this? And then now that you have this ability, how are you going to support those who come after you? And that's very important. You know, yes, I have my fifth graders, but at first I used to only do it in fifth grade. But now being an assistant principal, I've started in second grade. And they are growing and they're constantly looking around the building to figure out who's the next person that we need to. Do we see someone who doesn't have a voice? And that's our mission. Who doesn't have a voice? Who can we help to realize that they define them, not society? You know, and they'll go out and they'll say, oh, Miss Jones, it should be this one. It's not always the nicest person. It's not always the not so nice angel with broken wings. It's the one that we feel has the least amount of voice are the students that they go and seek now without me. They'll come to me. Oh, so-and-so needs to leave ladies' water bottle. They need to start tomorrow. They need to learn our pledge. They need to understand that we define ourselves, blah, blah. Okay. Gotcha. Right. And that's what's important. So even when I'm gone, they'll still be able to carry that forward and continue to pour into each other. And that's what's important. You know, not just having that, but letting them know that they have a voice no matter who's sitting in the seat at that time, and not allowing their voice to be smothered or diminished.
Wonderful. Well, I just want to thank our panelists. You guys were awesome and amazing, like I knew you would be. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And hopefully to our audience, you've all learned something that you can take away, something that you can help someone else to be empowered. And if you really want to get more engaged in this work, you can register for our community mobilization training sessions. If you go to wilmingtoneducationequity.com, you can learn more information. This has been just a real joy for me. I thank you all for taking the time to share your wisdom, your knowledge, and your love. We appreciate this so much. And again, to our audience, thank you for tuning in. And please be on the lookout for our next session, which will be in August. So you should be receiving more information about that as well. Thank you again for your time, and good night.